Hello, everyone. I'm Bradley Barth, Senior Reporter at SC Media. Welcome to today's session, 4 Easy Ways to Turn Endpoint Data into Actionable Insight, sponsored by LogRhythm. Data-driven security is the future, but alarm fatigue and data overload continue to hold security operations teams back. Fortunately, there are some easy ways to organize and correlate data so you can simplify the threat hunting process and free up your resources to better detect, respond to, and neutralize advanced threats. This webcast will discuss how to proactively search for and detect threats in your network. You'll learn to use endpoint data to gain visibility into your network and understand what's really going on. You'll learn how LogRhythm Smart Response can help orchestrate security operations, and threat hunting techniques using Carbon Black within LogRhythm. Our speakers today are Chris Berninger, Greg Foss, and Jake Reynolds. Chris Berninger is systems engineer at Carbon Black, a senior systems engineer in the business development group. Chris has been with Carbon Black since 2012 and in the security and IT field for over 18 years. Chris holds several industry certifications, including CISSP, ITIL, Certificate of Cloud Security Knowledge, and Microsoft Certified Professional. He holds a bachelor's degree in economics from Purdue University and an MBA from the University of North Dakota. Greg Foss is Global Security Operations Lead at LogRhythm. As head of Global Security Operations, he's tasked with leading both offensive and defensive aspects of corporate security. Greg was formerly a senior security researcher within LogRhythm Labs, where he developed new techniques and tools to detect advanced adversaries, presenting his research at national information security conferences such as Black Hat, DerbyCon, AppSec USA, B-Sides, and many others. He's also a very active member of the Denver information security community. Greg started out in the industry as a contract web developer, and then he branched out into security operations with the Department of Energy. After learning about security monitoring, Greg delved into penetration testing, and he was eventually placed in charge of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory's internal red team. He's just under a decade of experience in the information security industry with an extensive background in ethical hacking and offensive security. And finally, we have Jake Reynolds, Technical Alliances Engineer at LogRhythm. Jake is responsible for supporting the development and management of the company's I heard a little feedback there. Jake is responsible for supporting the development and management of the company's technical alliances with third-party technology providers. He has more than 20 years of experience in the information technology industry with a focus on information security. Prior to LogRhythm, he had held multiple security architect and engineer roles, and most recently helped spearhead security analytics and threat research at Level 3 Communications. Jake is an autodidact with a focus on security, technology, and aviation. As a reminder, there will be a Q&A following the presentation, so we would encourage you to type in any questions for our 3 speakers via the interface. And with that, I'd like to welcome in our presenters. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for being with us today.
Great. Thank you very much, Brad. And on behalf of Greg and Jake, I want to welcome everybody to the presentation today. This is Chris Berninger speaking with Carbon Black. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us. So we're going to start with a little bit of sort of prelude about Carbon Black, just to give you a sense of who Carbon Black is, what is Carbon Black Response, its endpoint detection response product, and then really quickly pivot over into how Carbon Black Response and LogRhythm join together to create joint value, kind of a 1 + 1 = 3 scenario. And then as you'll notice throughout this time that we share together, it's going to be more demo heavy really than slide heavy. So we have a couple of slides up front just to set the stage as I mentioned, but we're going to jump right into a technical demonstration after that. So a bit about Carbon Black. Perhaps many of you are familiar with Carbon Black, but perhaps others are not. So we put together one slide just to sort of encapsulate where Carbon Black is as a company. I'll point out to a few highlights. Carbon Black does have, it is an endpoint security company, so 100% focused on endpoint security. By endpoint, we're referring to desktop, laptop, servers, Windows, Mac, and Linux. And around endpoint security, Carbon Black has the #1 market share in that space. with over 7 million licenses being used around the world, several thousand customers, including about 30% of the Fortune 100. And as well, you'll note the 75-plus IR and MSSP partners. That's been a very large part of our success, is enabling incident responders and managed security providers to use Carbon Black on behalf of their customers and to provide those services. So now diving in more on the technology side, Carbon Black Response is one of Carbon Black's endpoint security solutions. And if you wanted to just boil it down to three, kind of 30,000-foot view perspectives, the first would definitely be complete visibility. So what Carbon Black Response does is it has a tiny little sensor that runs on your desktop, laptops, and servers. And what it does is it continuously collects information about what's happening on those systems and sends that information to a centralized server. So we refer to this as continuous centralized recording. You can think of the analogy of a security camera in physical security, where perhaps you walk into a bank or a convenience store and you look up at the ceiling. There's almost always at least one or many times multiple security cameras that are always running and always on. We like that analogy, even though we're not literally recording video of what's happening on a system, but we are recording all the operating system events and so forth, such that when you need to go back and respond to an incident, you'll have the information sitting there in front of you to very quickly respond to that incident. So we call it incident response in seconds. Also, a great side effect of having all that data centrally recorded is that you can do proactive threat hunting. You may pick up in an SC Media magazine article that says there's a new type of threat out there. Well, you can go in the console and 30 seconds later find out, does that threat exist in my environment? So that's the proactive threat hunting piece. And then real-time response, in that same console, that same solution, you're also able to respond to incidents doing things such as banning malware from not being able to execute, isolating or quarantining infected machines, remoting into machines to do things like deleting files and things of that nature. So diving a little bit deeper on the visibility piece, because this is really the kind of the secret sauce of Carbon Black Response. So anytime a file runs on a system, anytime there's a process execution, if there are changes to the file system or registry, if there's new files that are created, existing files that are edited, network connections that are made, if you open up a browser and go to a particular domain or URL, all of that's recorded. Anytime something runs, we're grabbing things such as the command line, when it was launched, how long it was launched for. And we're typically keeping this information for several weeks, even several months, so that even if you don't know that something is interesting today, you may find out a week from now that there's a new, sort of strain of malware or something that came out a week or two ago has just now been identified. You can very quickly see, is that in my environment, and take very quick action against that. All of this enables you to identify root cause and to visualize the attack. So on the particular point of visualizing an attack, when you actually go to look at a particular incident or a particular string of events, you'll see a visualization that looks just like this. And I'll actually show this in my demonstration here in just a moment. Now, in and of itself, Carbon Black Response is, of course, a very powerful endpoint detection and response solution. But where we really start to drive tremendous value is with the integration with LogRhythm. And if you think of Carbon Black Response and everything I just talked about, the continuous centralized recording, you can understand that how sending that data to LogRhythm gives LogRhythm then a ton of rich endpoint data and context so that it can better do its correlation in analytics, right, and SIM and log management. So LogRhythm, of course, its specialty is taking data from disparate data sources and correlating those into actionable events, well, where most of the time the challenge there is just getting that rich data in the first place, and that's what Carbon Black Response does. It's going to collect that rich endpoint data, send that over to LogRhythm, and that's the sort of the top half of the integration where it says machine data intelligence, and you can kind of see the arrow moving from left to right. But here's the powerful part. It's actually a two-way integration. The second direction of the integration is when you're using LogRhythm, let's say you're a SOC analyst, right? And LogRhythm is that's your single pane of glass. That's where your eyes are sort of, watching all day long. That's the place where you're living as a SOC analyst. When you see something that needs responded to, something that needs investigated further, you can actually use this two-way integration via LogRhythm's smart response function to then call into Carbon Black to take action on the endpoints. So remember those remediation steps I mentioned earlier, things like isolating an infected machine, killing a malicious file, things like that. You can actually take those actions directly from LogRhythm, which is really invaluable for a SOC analyst, especially, a lot of times we're challenged in security because we don't necessarily have expert resources. We don't necessarily have enough resources. So we need LogRhythm to come up with those actionable events and sort of, separate the needle from the haystack and just give us the things we need to look at. And then from that same console, be able to take action on the actual endpoint, even if that endpoint is roaming or halfway around the world or outside of our corporate network. And that's the capabilities that this two-way integration will do for you and that we're going to dive into much more deeply. Okay, great. Let me now jump over into a technical demonstration, and I want to start by talking a little bit more about this two-way integration. So this URL here at the top of your screen that points to a GitHub page, that is a public URL, so feel free to pull up this page yourself and research this further. But on this page then is documenting the integration between Carbon Black Response and LogRhythm. And as you can see here, there are several available commands as part of this integration. Directly from LogRhythm, you can do things like deleting a file on that remote endpoint. You can get a file. Maybe you want to upload a file from an endpoint to run it in a sandbox or run it in a virtual machine to see exactly what that file is doing. You can do that very easily. This function get will go grab that file from that system and bring it to a local directory. And as I mentioned earlier, you may want to isolate or quarantine an infected host. You may want to kill a malicious process that's running. Oftentimes, as part of a forensics investigation, you'll want to do a memory dump to see what live processes are running directly from memory. And by the way, I'll point out here, even though this memory dump feature is available and oftentimes is quite handy, especially to do remotely, oftentimes using Carbon Black Response in the first place kind of lowers the need to do things like, sort of post hoc traditional forensic analysis. If you think of traditional forensic analysis, oftentimes we're taking a hard drive, we're pulling it out of the system, we're cloning that hard drive, and then basically it's an archaeological dig to try to figure out what happened on that system a week ago or a month ago. As you'll see, though, in the Carbon Black Response demo that I'll show here in just a moment, and as I talked about in the slides, Carbon Black Response has already recorded all the information about what happened on a particular machine a week ago, 3 weeks ago, whatever, and you can see that very visually when you go into the interface, as I'll show in a moment. And then finally, the last command here is to do things like listing all processes that are running on that particular remote host. So all these can be very, very valuable in an incident response during an investigation, and this is really just a starting point. The great thing about this being up on GitHub, right, is that you can actually take these examples, you can adjust them. Everything in Carbon Black Response is also available programmatically via API, so via REST API. You can see some use cases are documented down here, as well as some future goals around this integration. All right, so now talked about the integration there for a moment. I'm going to switch into Carbon Black Response, sort of, just Carbon Black Response proper here for a few minutes, and then transition over to Greg and Jake from LogRhythm, who's going to dive deeper into the integration again, as well as LogRhythm itself. So this is the Carbon Black Response console, and what you can see is that out of all that data that's being continuously and centrally recorded, we did see a watch list hit a few minutes ago. It's a suspicious command spawn. Basically, there was a command prompt that was executed in a suspicious way, and we can see that this actually triggered a few minutes ago on this machine here. That's the machine name, and the offending process, if you will, was Adobe Acrobat. And we can see some summary information here, like, the same instance of Adobe also modified the registry some and did some file modifications, did not do any network connections, but did have a few sub-processes launched. So what I'm going to do here is go into the interface really to just sort of get a better sense of what might have happened on this particular system. I'm going to zoom in a bit here, just get maximum resolution. Now, you might have remembered this view from the screenshot earlier, but what you're basically looking at then is the kill chain of what exactly happened that triggered this particular alert. So here is my suspicious command execution on the right-hand side. The reason why it was suspicious is because Adobe Acrobat is not normally ever a parent process of a command prompt.
Excuse me, Chris?
So, yes.
Hey, this is Jake over at LogRhythm. It looks like the demo's not broadcasting your screen.
I appreciate that, Jake. Let me actually try this one more time. Apologize for that. How about now, Jake?
Well, the presenter view says that you're currently sharing. Oh, there we go. That's good.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. I think I clicked one button too short when I switched myself over to that mode. So great. I appreciate you pointing that out, Jake. So briefly then back on that GitHub page, since I don't believe I was sharing my screen at the time. This is the URL for the integration if you're interested in taking a look at that further. github.com/logarithm-labs/carbon-black-smart response. So now what you're looking at again is the Carbon Black response interface. And so what you're seeing here is a visualization of this particular attack, right? So we got an alert that said a command prompt ran in a suspicious fashion. And then if you actually drill into that, we can see that sure enough, 32 minutes ago in this case, we had a process run. This all started, the entire chain of events started with Thunderbird, which is the email client. So as you can imagine here, the end user was in Thunderbird, clicked on a link. That link ended up spawning Internet Explorer. And you can see every time something runs the exact command line with which that ran. So very easy to see exactly what it did. For any particular process, if you scroll down, you can see more information like what network connections were made, what file modifications were done, and so forth. So for example, if I look here, Internet Explorer here made 2 different network connections, and you can see those exact IP addresses. It's all this very rich information that's continuously being sent from Carbon Black Response to LogRhythm to really better enable your correlations, particularly when you think about the vast amount of network-based information that we pull into something like a LogRhythm, right? And to be able to correlate that against the endpoint information and take something like an IP address and actually figure out exactly which process that spawned from is very, very powerful. Now, going a little bit further in my analysis, you can see that Acrobat Reader 32 is indeed involved in this particular chain of events. Well, one of the interesting things is if you look at the command line here, you can see if you look at the very end of that command line, you can see that this is a PDF that was actually involved in this particular attack called eventguide.pdf, and it's sitting in the temporary internet files folder. So if you needed to go grab that file maybe to try to analyze it further, that's where you can look because we know where it was because we were recording everything as it occurred. Now, if I kind of keep going through the chain of events here, you can see where that actual eventguide.pdf executed, and then you can see some other things that happened here, like Notepad was launched, and then we can see some PowerShell activity and some command prompts. And if you want to know what the command prompts did, right, you have the command line here, so you can see that it actually executed a batch file called f-reg.12.bat, and if you want to see what that batch file did, you can simply go and look and see that there were some new registry keys added. So all this information is invaluable when you are responding to an incident because within just a couple of minutes' time, you're going to see exactly what happened on a particular machine. And in fact, if I actually switch over momentarily to a Kali Linux machine, this was the actual attack that was run. And you can see that everything I just showed you maps perfectly to the attack. So for example, we can see that PowerShell was executed. We can see that eventguide.pdf was kind of the genesis of the attack. That was the malicious PDF that was part of the spear phishing link, right? You can see that there were some reg edits done. Remember that Notepad was part of the kind of chain of events here, right? So normally we don't have the luxury of seeing the attacker's playbook, so that's what Carbon Black Response does for us. It shows us everything that happened and really gives us that incident response in seconds, because we don't have to go figure out, what happened on a machine. And by the way, I might have 5,000 machines in my environment. It would take me 30 seconds to figure out, did this same incident, did the same malware outbreak happen anywhere else in my environment? That's a very easy query because Carbon Black already has all the data within it, and you can come up here and you can do very easy searches to determine that type of query. Now, the last thing I want to point out about this particular incident is that, okay, you get to the point where you realize a system is compromised, that system needs some remediative actions, right? So the host name is here, w7-low-y. I know the username. I know the domain that the user was logged into. I know the process that was involved. Well, maybe at this point in time, I want to do some simple things such as banning a malicious file to make sure that if it tries to launch again or that it tries to launch anywhere else in the environment, or if it's currently running, to go ahead and kill that. That's what banning a file will do for us. So I can do that easily with one click of a button. Also, let's say I recognize that I might need to work on this machine for 15 or 20 minutes, and I'm not quite clear, is there malicious traffic leaving this machine? Is there command and control traffic? Is there data being exfiltrated as we speak? Regardless of what direction you go, you can isolate that system to essentially quarantine it and stop all the malicious traffic immediately. And then finally, with the Go Live feature, what this will do is actually let me remote into a machine. I'll just kind of pop this up momentarily. This also uses the API similar to the way that I showed the integration earlier, to where you can do things like killing a malicious file, taking a memory dump, right? It's the exact same API calls that we're doing from the LogRhythm interface. The benefit of the integration being, right, that you're doing it from the same SOC analyst viewpoint that they're looking at SOC events in LogRhythm, or you can take those same endpoint actions. So the last thing I want to point out here is that when we are collecting all this data, that it's being continuously bounced off of about 15 different threat intelligence feeds. Some of these are first-party feeds. They're Carbon Black feeds that we're actually looking for malicious activity and so forth, advanced threats. We also have a community feed. If you think back to that slide where there were thousands of Carbon Black customers and dozens of MSSP and IR partners, well, they're creating threat intelligence for us as well and putting that into the community feed so that you can benefit from what everybody else around the world happens to be seeing in their environment. And then again, all these different feeds, by the way, these are all built in, and we do also integrate with some next-gen firewalls and detonation engines and things like that. So if you've made some other security investments, chances are we've probably got some interesting integrations there as well. So at this point in time, let me stop my sharing, and I'm going to pass the rest of the presentation over to Greg and Jake. So stop my sharing and switch to the next slide and confirm, Greg and Jake, are you able to see the 10th slide here?
Yeah, I see the next slide here. This is Jake. Let me see if we can advance. Yeah, we don't have our arrow up here. Yeah, we don't have control of the slides at the moment.
Okay, that might just take a second. And for now, I can advance you to slide 11, and just take a second to get control.
All right, good demo, by the way. So I'm going to take a couple minutes to run through the threat lifecycle and our approach to managing threats with our platform. Most of us are familiar with the cyber attack lifecycle, and most of us know that the earlier in the process that we can detect threats, the better chance we have of minimizing their impact. It basically starts with recon. Maybe this is a directed attack and we're gathering social media to plan a spear phishing attack, or maybe it's just a coder confirming a Windows vulnerability that they're getting ready to deploy. And then they move into an initial compromise, landing that spear phish or just an add drop or leaving a binary. Then they move into command and control, where systems are receiving further instructions, getting payloads from the adversary, and moving on to lateral movement, where maybe someone will pivot into a data center or more interesting workstations, or sometimes that remains on that machine, but a privilege escalation while they're moving on to target attainment. Maybe this is a browser plugin trying to harvest bank account information, or searching for the plans for a secret phase conjugate tracking system. Regardless of that target, the next step is to steal those plans, move the credit card data out, start encrypting files, or null routing chunks of the internet backbone. Oh, there we go. It looks like we've got control back. Regardless, Carbon Black gives us a really good visibility at the endpoint for anything that happens within these stages. Let's see here. So regardless of scope or threat model, each of these activities generates evidence in an environment. And we start with forensic collection of that evidence, right? You can't respond to, detect or respond to what you can't see. So we start with visibility. Now that we're collecting all of that, we stand a chance at seeing things. We're going to use a combination of search and machine analytics to find those threats. Next, we need to qualify what's going on, and typically this can be a pretty manual process that's both time-consuming and time-sensitive. So we need lots of context data in the right place at the right time. To some extent, we can automate that data gathering, and that gives us a faster, more efficient process so that we can kind of lower our mean time to detect and respond to these threats. Once we have a qualified threat, we need to investigate, analyze what's going on, figure out the scope and scale of an incident, and figure out if this is a one-time thing or if there's a full compromise of our environment. For this, we need rapid access to forensic and context data for both internal and external sources. And automation and efficient processes can really make a huge difference here. So as an example, Carbon Black lets us pull binaries and memory dumps down immediately for evaluation that we can even send on for reverse engineering if that's in scope. From there, once we've qualified and investigated a threat, we want to neutralize what's going on. Our incident response processes and automation have the biggest impact here. And in the case of Carbon Black, as discussed, we can isolate a host, preventing it from impacting other systems while we finish up the response cycle. Once that incident is complete, case is closed, we move on to lessons learned. Right, we can reimage any devices that are involved, figure out who to report up the chain, review actions, and then adapt and change anything. Feed that back into the process loop. So the next time this happens, maybe we can fully automate the qualification and response process. So with that, we'll move on to the integration, and I'll hand that over to Greg.
All right. Well, thanks for the great overview, Jake, and great demo, Chris. So at this point, what I want to do is dive a little bit deeper into LogRhythm's integration with Carbon Black. And so to start that off, we want to look at the dashboard, because this is kind of where we aggregate all of the events that we're pulling in from all of the endpoints within our environment. And one of the things I really like about Carbon Black is just the very rich and verbose data that you're able to collect very quickly and easily from all of the systems within your environment. And I won't spend too much time on this slide because we'll jump into a demo in a bit, and I'll actually show you more hands-on how this works and how we can actually use this to respond to events within the network. So one of the next key pieces of the integration with Carbon Black is our ability to alarm off of events that we're collecting from the with the Carbon Black agents. So now Carbon Black does have its own built-in alarming, but the nice thing about being able to pipe these alarms to the SIEM or alarm on certain events is that you can choose how you want to handle these events, what groups you want to have handle them, how you want them triaged, basically. Because in a lot of environments, we have people who may only have access to the SIEM and not necessarily want to grant them access to the full EDR platform, the Carbon Black response interface. So with that, we allow them to see the alarms that are coming in, understand certain events that they're seeing in the environment, but also don't have to give them full access to Carbon Black with the ability to remote into systems and perform actions. We usually like segregating that out so we have more privileged users that are able to do those types of roles. But the nice thing is we get all of the same types of data piping into different locations, so it helps out a lot with triage. Now, one of the next things that we really like with the integration with LogRhythm is monitoring for admin actions, and in particular those that are suspicious. So someone uses Carbon Black to remote into a system and run PowerShell and dump credentials like what we're seeing here. Now, this is something you can also track within Carbon Black itself, but may not necessarily be something that you want to have showing up in that interface because it could tip off the admin who's abusing that functionality. So that's a big reason why we like separating these things out and alarming on things differently by way of different systems. The next piece is reporting. For us, being LogRhythm, we like to do a lot of our centralized reporting through the SIEM directly. So the ability to pull all of this data in from Carbon Black and develop our own reports that integrate with our existing reporting is very useful. And next is in-depth analysis. One of my favorite parts of the Carbon Black integration, it's kind of hard to see here, so I'll zoom in real quick. But right here, we're pulling all of the command line activity from our entire environment. So the great thing here is even if someone drops a binary and subverts standard detections, you can still pick up on this activity by pulling all the command line activity that's associated with every binary being executed on your network. This will help tremendously when it comes to detecting pivoting, misuse of elevated permissions, and various other things in your network that you might otherwise not see. Because you're not just relying on standard binary detections, you're actually looking at user behaviors and abuse of functionality. So a very key aspect of this integration. Now the last piece, and probably my favorite piece, is the automation aspect. So tying all of the verbose response capabilities that Carbon Black brings to the table directly into LogRhythm and giving us the ability to trigger off of alarms that we're seeing in the environment and basically, say we see certain activity happen in the environment and it's something we know is bad, we know we want to isolate a system or kill a process or delete a file or something like that, we can have automatically happen as soon as that alarm is observed within the SIEM. And this is something we'll actually show you here in a second when it comes to the demo. So with that, I'm going to try and share my screen here. All right. Is that showing up for you guys? All right. All right. So up here, what we're looking at is just the high-level dashboard of the Carbon Black the Carbon Black dashboard within the LogRhythm SIEM. So up here we have various items of interest, right? We have all the top entities that are impacted by events that we're observing and triggering on alarms within Carbon Black. Interesting items is blank because we were messing around with this earlier and broke it a little bit. Top watch list hits, so we're piping all of these events all of the watch list events that you've triggered within Carbon Black directly into the SIEM. So any of these that are hit within Carbon Black, we're observing those events triggering directly within the SIEM. And then we're also doing long tail analysis on all this so that we can directly see, what's happening in the environment, what are the top most impacted systems, what users are most commonly associated with certain events on the network, and various other items of interest. Now fortunately, being a demo environment, we don't have any infected systems. Most shenanigans right here is actually people trying to disable the Carbon Black agents and mess with our alerting and our response capabilities. So over here we have the top users. These are the users that are triggering the most events, the most auditable events within Carbon Black. And then these two tables here are very useful. We're actually pulling the least observed files in the environment and their subsequent hashes. So this is very useful for us because right away we can see if a malicious file was dropped. If there's a new binary or something like that that we haven't observed elsewhere in the environment, it's definitely something we want to look at. And now taking that in correlation with the hash as well, we have a lot of the data available to us very quickly and easily to investigate this further. Now to show you guys kind of how this integration works and how some of the automation capabilities work, we're going to bring up our user system here. So I'll expand their desktop. So we're just RDP'd into a user system here, and they have a Tor browser, so you know they're up to no good already. Plus they're browsing the internet with Internet Explorer, so we're off to a bad start, right? So they're going to go to this malicious website, and this is going to run a HTA attack. Now the thing I like about HTA attacks is they bypass a lot of traditional antivirus. So that's the reason we decided to do an HTA attack for this demo. So we're going to run this file. It also works great for captive portals and those types of attacks as well. So as you can see, this is just a fake Facebook web page. They ran the HTA file, and now the system has become infected. I'll bring up the attacker's view over here. So you can see they have a interpreter session. So from here, they could do all sorts of things. They have full access to the system, basically. So what we want to do is actually cut off the attacker's access first and foremost. So let me hide that window here. And so we'll come over here and take a look at the alarms. Now you can see right here we have the HTA attack that was triggered from the Carbon Black logs that we were pulling into this host. So you can see right away that this event triggered following the system becoming infected by visiting a malicious website. So we have a smart response action configured here. And so the smart response, we actually have various actions we can perform, all of the ones I was showing on the previous slide. But I made this one manual just so I could show you guys what the capabilities are and how you can actually add user control to these as well, but also without adding full capability to do more damaging things, right? So over here, we're going to look at the smart response action as isolate host, and all we have to do is we could either approve or deny this, depending on what we want to do with this host. So I'll go ahead and approve this action, and so it's approved. And now we'll come over to the Carbon Black dashboard, and let's go into the sensors here, so we can pick up our host and make sure that the isolation action has worked on the host. As you can see, isolate's been configured, and there we go. So now if we try and go in here in a second, it's already unresponsive, so that's good. So it's shut off my access to the system. It's also simultaneously shut off access for the attackers to the system. So perfect, right? So go ahead and close this because my RDP session is, if I can even do that, is worthless now. We'll go back to the attacker too. They should probably not be able to do anything. Now, one of the really nice things with the Carbon Black isolation is that it isolates them from the rest of the network, which is great for things like ransomware attacks and things that could spread throughout the environment. But even better, it allows access still for us as instant responders to go into the system. Even though it's isolated from the network, we can still go in and dynamically perform a forensic investigation on this host by way of the go live action here. So we're going to use this, and this is the only system that this host is now allowed to communicate with. Now, Chris showed a really good demo of some of the functionalities of live response here, and this is, you know, aside from pranking everyone on my team, this is actually a very useful security tool. So you can bring up help here, and this will show the various commands that we can run. So for this, you know, going off of the alarm that we saw it was a PowerShell HTA attack, right? So what we'd want to do is look at the processes running on this host. So all we have to do is PS, pull up all the processes, and then let's see here, we'll go look for PowerShell. Looks like there's two processes, two PowerShell processes running. Now what we can do is go ahead and kill these, right? So we'll go kill, who's this first one? 3624. So we'll kill that guy, and then we'll kill the next one too, just to be sure. Now hopefully they weren't actually working on something in PowerShell, but since it's a demo, I'm not too worried. So went ahead and killed those processes. Now let's check again. Make sure this host is no more PowerShell running. And we can actually go from here and go ahead and remove the isolation now. So we'll say we did an investigation, took care of the threat, and now the host is okay to put back on the network. And now, as soon as this host comes back up, we'll still see the attacker. Oh, there we go. Our session has been terminated, so we've lost communication with this host because as soon as the host came back online, the session was no longer communicating back out. So we've essentially severed the computer from the network, resolved the incident, and now the system's back online and in working order. So with that, I'm going to switch back over to the slides here, and there we go. And then we'll go into the next part of the slide, and Jake will take you through some of the events that we have coming up in the near future.
All right. Thanks, Greg. That was a really good demo. So I wanted to take a moment to let everyone know we're hosting a combined LogRhythm Carbon Black Explorer event, which will be a number of regional hands-on workshops where you can sign up and actually get your hands on the LogRhythm web dashboard and play around in an environment where we're integrated with Carbon Black. We're generating some of these use cases, and you can play around and isolate your own devices and potentially pull down some individual files and stuff. So we're working on putting together these particular use cases where we can kind of automate that and play them back for you guys, and you can go in and look at that data on our dashboard and respond to alarms and again execute smart responses. So these are going to be half-day sessions that'll be a guided hands-on experience. And if you're interested in attending, reach out to us, your reseller, a partner, or email channelmarketing@logrhythm.com. And I think we'll try and get that integrated into the chat or with the question session since we didn't get that onto this slide. So I think with that, we'll move on to Q&A.
All right, gentlemen, thanks so very much for that presentation. And we will, at this point, go to the Q&A session. And we'll begin with this question. What is the biggest benefit that people don't necessarily expect about using LogRhythm and Carbon Black?
Well, this is Chris Berninger with Carbon Black. I can take it from the perspective of Carbon Black, and then Greg and Jake maybe have some thoughts on the LogRhythm side. So I think the number one thing that people don't realize until they have Carbon Black Response deployed in their environment is just how much time it actually saves them during an incident response. So sometimes when we do sort of a demo with a prospective buyer or a proof of concept, they see the alerts that are coming up in Carbon Black Response, and they sort of think to themselves, well, I already have a lot of alerts in my environment. I have too many alerts already, et cetera. And so they almost worry about, bringing something in that gives them more alerts. But I want to encourage that it's actually the opposite of that. So think of all the alerts that you're already working today. If you can go into the Carbon Black console and, spend 2 or 3 minutes and determine that an alert is simply a false positive and needs no more investigation, that saves you an extraordinary amount of time. So it really is a tremendous time saver. And Greg and Jake, any thoughts on the LogRhythm side?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. This is Greg. I would definitely agree. That was a big reason we decided to pursue not just integrations with Carbon Black and LogRhythm, but also using Carbon Black internally for our own incident response processes. Because this is something where a lot of us in the industry face these situations where you have to take a system offline, or you have to go talk to a user, you have to do these various IR functions, whereas once we added Carbon Black, we were able to do this instantly right over the network and also handle remote hosts as well, without having to do things like worrying about them sending their computer through the mail or worrying about next time they're going to be in town or things like that. We can dynamically take action on either local or remote hosts very quickly and easily by using Carbon Black. And the integration with the SIM has made everyone on my team's life much easier because they don't have to do as much manual triage and investigative work. They can have a lot of this happen in the background and then worry about the actual IR piece.
Right, exactly. A lot of times, this is Jake, by the way, a lot of times getting that additional data seems counterintuitive and then it's going to make everyone's life harder. But once you bring that into an environment and start collating it and comparing it with all of the other data, it allows you to kind of prune out your false positives and find those false negatives. And so then the alerts that you do get are much more accurate, much more actionable.
Okay, great. Next question. Does LogRhythm have the ability to capture this verbose data without using Carbon Black?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take this one. So this is Greg. Yes, we are able to pull this data using various other sources. The LogRhythm agent itself has a lot of verbose capabilities in it. We can capture network data, process data, user data, registry data, and of course log data from every system that we have these agents deployed. You can also augment this by using Sysmon or other similar tools to pull like the command line data and other verbose data. With PowerShell in particular, if you upgrade your systems to PowerShell v5, you can use PowerShell message trace logging to actually not just capture what scripts are being executed, but also the contents of these scripts. So that's something very useful as well. So basically anything that creates a log, we're able to capture very quickly and easily. But the thing with Carbon Black is that you're able to augment this and not just capture the data, but also perform dynamic response. And that was a huge part for us, is the ability to go out and remote into systems after viewing certain activities and then take action there. And on top of that, we also have the ability to ban hashes and other things like that. So I think it's a very powerful integration, but yes, you can pull a lot of the same data from various other sources.
Okay, great. Next question. Does this integration help combat ransomware, and if so, how?
Oh, sure. This is Greg again. Yeah, definitely. I think that could be one of the strongest integrations, in that ransomware and its ability to spread, especially to network shares and other systems that may be communicating with this host, the ability to dynamically isolate the host upon the first hint that there's something like a ransomware infection going on, that's a huge step in the right direction, because then you're only worrying about one host instead of an entire share that you have to worry about making sure you had backups for and trying to recover from that. So the isolation is a huge aspect in terms of protecting against ransomware.
So I'll add a little bit to that. This is Jake over at LogRhythm. Carbon Black gives us very granular process visibility, and as we talked about the threat lifecycle, each stage of an infection generates those events, and if we can pick that behavior up early enough, Carbon Black can be used to say, hey, this process is starting to create lots of files with a high level of entropy or accessing and writing a lot of files in an abnormal rate. And then a smart response can be used to, in an automated fashion, tip that process over. So you can not only isolate that device and keep it from spreading throughout the network, but you can minimize the amount of damage that it can do to a single device.
Great. Okay, next question. Does the integration with LogRhythm work with Carbon Black ER Cloud?
Yes, so this is Chris. I can answer that question. So Carbon Black Response Cloud does work with LogRhythm. The only sort of technical prerequisite for that happening is just that there's an encrypted path in between the two. So in other words, if you have a LogRhythm, has a on-premise, sort of a non-public IP address, for example, we just need to make sure that there's a encrypted tunnel available between them, because Carbon Black Response Cloud, of course, will be a publicly addressable IP address or domain. So as long as that's the case and we can route that traffic, then the integration will work. And that is, again, a bi-directional integration, which will work both directions as long as we have a path in between the two.
Okay, great. Okay, next question. What benefit is there in using LogRhythm's network monitor tool if I have Carbon Black?
So the network monitor tool is really designed to give us granular visibility of what's happening on the wire, on the network itself, not necessarily with an individual device and generic statistics of network activity there. So there's a lot of forensic value there. You could do rules to initiate PCAPs. You can get protocol level visibility, application level visibility of the network traffic, but it's really at the network traffic and not what's going on with the endpoint. So those tend to sit and listen in between segments of a network or between a network and your egress out to, say, the internet.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jake. And to add on to that, one of the main things that we do within our team is we'll have alerts trigger within Network Monitor that we'll see, and we'll start investigating. But the real key to understanding that activity, that network activity, is looking at what exactly happened on the endpoint. And so that's where we can go from Network Monitor and say, okay, we saw this host communicating with this possible Tor exit node or something like that, something we wouldn't want going on our network. Then we can go back to the host and see what process was actually making those outbound network calls. So that correlation between the actual network activity we're observing within Netmon and then the endpoint that was originating from, down to what exactly that process was, what command line activities were used to execute that process, and so forth. So using both of them just really helps out with your overall defense in-depth strategy.
Great. Still about 8 minutes, so we can take some more questions. The next one is, can Carbon Black Response replace my antivirus?
Oh, great. I can take that one, Brad. So Carbon Black as a company has 3 different solutions. The one we focused on today is Carbon Black Response, and that product is in the EDR category, which stands for Endpoint Detection and Response. So that particular solution is not a proactive prevention solution. It's more about continuous centralized recording, responding to incidents, things of that nature. So you could think of it more as a complementary solution that can sit alongside your existing antivirus and so forth. However, if you're interested in replacing your antivirus with something that's more effective than traditional antivirus and yet much more lightweight as far as a system resource standpoint, we would encourage you to take a look at Carbon Black Defense, or CB Defense. That's one of our 3 solutions, and that particular solution is a next-generation antivirus solution. So it is certified as an antivirus replacement, again, giving you much better efficacy against not just signature-based malware, but also fileless attacks, script-based attacks, advanced attacks, and things of that nature, and giving you strong visibility and being very lightweight on your endpoint. So again, if you're interested in antivirus replacement, CB Defense is the right one to go with there, and CB Defense data can be sent to LogRhythm as well, so there's a strong integration piece there too.
Great. Next question. Would I be able to identify new or unknown attacks with Carbon Black and feed that to LogRhythm for alerting?
Yeah, this is Chris again, no question. So one of the real power, and I don't think I actually touched on this in my presentation, so I appreciate the question bringing this out. One of the things that I love most about Carbon Black Response is that the data is all there. So you can slice and dice the data any way you see fit, and what you can do then from a threat hunting perspective is identify patterns as opposed to static indicators. So what I mean by that is a static indicator is an IP address or a file hash or a domain name. Most security detection is based on those types of static indicators, but the weak vulnerability with that type of detection is that it's very easy for the adversary to change a file hash or to change an IP address or to change a domain name. So what's much more resilient is actually focusing on dynamic indicators or pattern-based indicators, and Carbon Black absolutely gives you those capabilities. In fact, if you remember the detection alert that we saw that I showed earlier during my part of the demo, it was a suspicious command prompt. really we just noticed an odd pattern of behavior, which is that there was a command prompt that was launched from Adobe Acrobat, and that's not normal behavior, so that's a built-in indicator that's pattern-based. That type of pattern-based detection can really alert you to brand new advanced type attacks that have never before been seen, but because of the built-in detection as well as layering on your own queries, you can get alerted to those types of things within a few minutes of them happening.
All right. Next question. What are the Carbon Black agent memory and CPU impacts on the endpoints?
Yeah, the Carbon Black response sensor is extraordinarily lightweight. The normal RAM usage is going to be about 12 to 14 megs of RAM. The normal CPU usage is going to be 0 to 1%. It can sit fine alongside other agents, as I mentioned earlier. The reason why it's so lightweight is it doesn't rely on signatures. It doesn't have, big DAT file updates or anything like that. It doesn't have to do a full disk scan or anything of that nature. It's just always on, always recording, and all it's really doing is sending, data up to a server and then waiting for commands to do things like isolating a machine. So it's a very, very tiny agent.
All right, great. Next question. Carbon Black has several products, response, defense, and protection. Does LogRhythm integrate with all three?
Yeah, the short answer is definitely. So the beauty of LogRhythm is they make it very easy for endpoint products like the 3 Carbon Black products to send data to LogRhythm, right? And so any of those 3 products can send data in near real time, usually within 5 minutes or so of something happening. That data will get all the way from the endpoint to the Carbon Black server and then over to LogRhythm so that you're getting near real-time updates and alerts and correlations with the other pieces of your environment.
Great. I think we can maybe squeeze in at least one more here. How about this one? Can you ballpark an average MPS requirement when feeding Carbon Black into LogRhythm?
So per endpoint, there ends up being about 8 to 10 megs of data per endpoint per day coming from Carbon Black response. Now, we have customers who will pipe 100% of that data into LogRhythm. We have other customers, though, that are more selective about it. For example, they may say, just send alert data, just send anytime there's a network connection, just send anytime there's something, of a certain nature, file modifications. You can get very granular. So in other words, the choice is up to you. But if you were to send 100% of data, it's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 megs per endpoint per day.
All right, great. And with that, I believe our time is just about up, so we will at this point wrap up. But thank you so very much, gentlemen, for taking the time to speak today. With that, today's session is concluded. And again, I would like to thank our 3 guests. I'd like to thank Chris Berninger, Greg Foss, and Jake Reynolds for being here, and thanks to everyone else for tuning in. As a reminder, this webcast will be available on demand beginning tomorrow on the SC Media website under the Events tab. Additionally, the slides from this presentation will also be available to anyone who's interested. For SC Media, this is Bradley Barth. Have a safe day online.